are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to this first special edition of the Way to Wow shows for 2026. So it is Monday, January 19th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And as is my custom, my flag is flying for the federal holiday and taking a break from business and the topics we cover at Jiggers's Place, relationships and books and such, to spend a little while reflecting on the meaning of this day, the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his work, his impact on our country and our society. It's nice, I suppose, to have an extra day off work if you're a government worker, you work for a bank or the post office or something like that. But I think it's incumbent on us to make these days meaningful. They're not just a day for having a barbecue and having a day off work. There's a reason, presumably, why these days have been established, and I think it's so that we will take a little while and just ponder the lives of the individuals, the historical events that happened on these days, that sort of thing. So, as is my practice, I am going to talk a little bit about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's background, his life and his accomplishments. And then, on some days, for example, on Lincoln's birthday, I look for a different speech to read each year. In the case of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., although he gave many great speeches and he wrote many wonderful pieces, far and away, I think the most powerful is what's come to be known as the "I Have a Dream" speech that he gave at the March on Washington. And I've read that now, I think, for the last 2 years. I'm going to read it again this year. See if I can get through it without tearing up. It is incredibly powerful. It remains, I think, among the very clearest statements of that to which we aspire, or I hope to which we aspire here in the United States of America. So, talking first about Martin Luther King Jr.'s biography. He was a Baptist minister and civil rights leader, of course, who became probably the most prominent figure in the American civil rights movement in the 1950s and the 1960s. So his early life was shaped by his family, education, the segregation of that time between Blacks and other members of American society. And this laid the foundation for his role as a leader in the civil rights movement. So it blended his intellectual capabilities, his religious convictions. He was indeed a minister, as I noted a moment ago, and his personal experience with racial discrimination. So he was born January 15th, 1929. Interestingly enough, the same year that my dear Marie, who I always sign off to at the end of each show. So again, January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, to Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., as you would imagine, a prominent minister, and Alberta Williams King, who was a teacher. He grew up in a tight-knit middle-class family in Atlanta's Sweet Auburn neighborhood. It was a thriving center for Black culture and business during the era of segregation. He had an older sister, Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel, who went by the initials AD. From a young age, King was exposed to the injustices of racism. He first experienced it when he was told he could no longer play with white friends because he was black. If and I think it's sometimes hard to appreciate the impact that such instances have on children. My older sister Marla visited me yesterday, and we talked for a while. We went and had dinner, and we're at the point in life where you we take time, not on purpose per se, but we have, reasonably long lives on which back to reflect. We shared, childhood together, et cetera. And we talk about different things that we experienced when we were children, and we were sharing some of those moments, laughing a lot about them, but also I think discovering from each other's impressions of those childhood memories, the impact that they had on our lives. Now, we were fortunate not to have traumatic events, but for a Black child growing up in the era of segregation, the idea that he couldn't play with his white friends, because he was Black, I can only imagine must have made a very, very deep impression. And it, I think, planted the seeds for his later work in the civil rights movement. And two, I think that um, one could imagine that while the worst ravages of segregation and racism were experienced by Blacks, there was an impact on whites as well. I with the kind of upbringing that King had, the fact that white children would be denied the opportunity to get to know him, to interact with him, was surely a loss to those children. Now, I'm not saying they experienced it as such, but the inability for or the inability in the sense of society being unwilling to allow interaction between blacks and whites, I think, at least in part, perpetuated the divisions in our society. It's a lot easier to hate the other when one is isolated from the other, isolated from people that are not like oneself. And the loss to both, I think, is unfortunate and real. So King's parents were a strong influence on his life. His father was a fiery preacher and a civil rights advocate himself. And he instilled in his son the importance of standing up against injustice, true injustice, which is what segregation was. His mother was a college educated woman at a time when uh, very few Black women went to college, and she nurtured his intellectual and emotional development. So academically, King was quite gifted. He skipped 2 grades, and he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta at the age of 15. Today, that just sounds, extraordinarily unusual. But when colleges were first founded in this country, it was not unusual at all for boys in their mid-teens to go to college once they had finished their primary and secondary educations. Um, Nonetheless, Morehouse College was a historically Black college, but still, not a lot of Blacks, men or women, went to college even at this time. So, just a little bit about Morehouse College. It was founded in 1867 in Atlanta, Georgia, during the Reconstruction era. That was the post-Civil War era, when Republicans went into the South to rebuild the South along um, after the abolition of slavery, and with the intent to advance blacks in society. And it was founded to educate newly freed African American men. And over the years, it became one of the most prestigious historic black colleges and universities in the United States. And it's known for its emphasis on leadership, character development, and academic excellence. So it was an all male institution, as were most colleges back then. There were all female institutions, colleges as well. That was, again, much more common than it is today. And it produced a number of prominent leaders in the African American community, in addition to Martin Luther King Jr. A notable alumni included the theologian Howard Thurman, filmmaker Spike Lee, and former Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson. So perhaps some of those names are familiar to you. I would guess Spike Lee being the one most likely. And King initially resisted his father's following in his father's footsteps, I should say, and to become a minister. But after a period of kind of self-reflection, he embraced the calling, and he was inspired by having the church as a platform for social change. Now, this was happening not only among Baptists, but the Roman Catholic Church was entering an era where it became more involved in social change as well, as did Judaism for that matter. And so during this time of King trying to figure out what he was going to do, he was influenced by Morehouse College's president, Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, who was a theologian and an outspoken advocate for racial equality. Mays became a mentor to King, shaping his moral and ethical framework. So King graduated from Morehouse in 1948. He graduated in 1948 with a degree in sociology, and went on to earn a Bachelor of Divinity degree from Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania in 1951. During his seminary years, he was exposed to the teachings of Mohandas Gandhi, and the idea of nonviolent resistance, which is what Gandhi had used to essentially gain Indian as an Asian Indian independence. So King rose to prominence by advocating for nonviolent resistance to racial segregation and injustice, drawing inspiration both from Gandhi as well as Christian teachings. He first gained national attention as the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 through 1956 that was sparked by Rosa Parks's arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, to a white passenger. So in 1957, King co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, through the collective effort of several civil rights leaders, most notably himself, Martin Luther King Jr. He played a central role in the organization's creation. He served as its first president. And his leadership and vision, at least initially, became synonymous with the SCLC's mission of nonviolent civil rights advocacy. Ralph David Abernathy was a close confidant of King, and he was instrumental in organizing the Montgomery bus boycott, and he served as a key leader in the SCLC throughout the civil rights movement. He was a very, very close friend of Martin Luther King Jr. Bayard Rustin, although he was not a formal founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he was a strong advisor, and he actually introduced King to the principles of nonviolence. He played a significant role in organizing the initial meeting and shaping the SCLC's philosophy. Fred Shuttleworth was a minister like King, of the fiery brand, if you will. He was an activist from Birmingham, Alabama, a city in which I've spent a great deal of time, and is filled with history, both good and bad, of the civil rights period in the United States. So Shuttleworth was a founding member of the SCLC, and he helped lead major campaigns, including those targeting segregation in Birmingham. Joseph Laurie was an early supporter and eventual leader of the SCLC, and he contributed to its early organization as well as its long-term success. And finally, Ella Baker, who was an experienced activist and organizer. She really played a critical role in bringing together leaders for the initial meeting and helped to establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's infrastructure. So the official founding of the SCLC took place during a meeting that went from January 10th through 11th, 1957, at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where King served as co-pastor. It was initially called the Southern Leadership Conference on Transportation and Nonviolent Integration, but the name was changed. The SLCTNI doesn't have quite the elegance of the SCLC, but more importantly, the name by which it became known, the SCLC, was more indicative of what the organization was really seeking to accomplish. So as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King led numerous civil rights campaigns, including the Birmingham campaign, the March on Washington in 1963, and the Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965. I have already mentioned briefly his I Have a Dream speech that was delivered during the March on Washington. It is among the most iconic speeches in American history, and I'll talk a little bit about the speech before I read it in a few minutes. So King's leadership helped to achieve major legislative victories, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his efforts to combat racial inequality through nonviolence. On April 4th, 1968, King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, while supporting a strike by sanitation workers. After a 2-month manhunt that was led by the FBI, James Earl Ray was captured. He was tried and convicted for King's murder. It's interesting to note that the FBI maintained an enormous dossier on Martin Luther King Jr. J. Edgar Hoover was, to say the least, not a fan of Dr. King. Nonetheless, the FBI, like I said, led the investigation and tracked down the murderer, and they did so with a great deal of alacrity. There's a number of books on it. I read one. The title isn't coming to me. It's Hellhounds something or other. It's a very powerful story. One of the things that one learns as one reads about Dr. King's life is he was by no means a perfect man. He was a man. And from my perspective, his imperfection makes his accomplishments all the more notable. The great men and women of history were first and foremost people. They were not perfect. They were not God or gods, lahavdil, as we say. They were flesh and blood men and women like you and me, and that they were able to almost rise above their imperfections to accomplish great things for the world is a testament to their character, despite their imperfections. So, King's legacy as a champion of equality, justice, and peace endures, and his life is celebrated annually in the United States in the form of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which we celebrate today. It is why I do this show as well as the other special editions. So I'm going to move to talking for a few moments about Dr. King's speech. The speech was given on August 28th, 1963. More than 200,000 Americans gathered in the nation's capital, demonstrating in peaceful assembly on the Mall between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, and on behalf of equal justice for all. In a day of stirring speeches, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was electrifying. His soaring eloquence and his conscious fusing of religious rhetoric and familiar patriotic symbols conveyed a prophetic and uplifting sense of a world that might yet be. The I Have a Dream speech quickly entered the American language and national consciousness as a pithy evocation of the goals of the civil rights movement. So I'm using the text from a book called The American Reader, edited by Diane Ravitch. This is, I believe, the first edition of it, if I'm not mistaken. It was originally published in 1990. It is a tremendous resource for works, for literary works related to the history of our country, and indeed the I Have a Dream speech is well accompanied by many other amazing tomes. Okay, so I'm going to read the entire speech. It is not as brief as other pieces that I read on these special editions, but I think it is critically important for us to hear these words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on this day that commemorates his life and memory. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of captivity. But 100 years later, we must face the tragic fact that the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize an appalling condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is not a time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment and to underestimate the determination of the Negro. The sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content to have a rude awakening if the nation will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a desert state sweltering with the heat of injustice and oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my four little children I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day the state of Alabama, whose governor's lips who are presently dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and girls and walk together as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I return to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my father died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring." And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hills of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous peaks of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountain side, let freedom ring. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual: "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." Haven't gotten through it yet without being emotional. If we are discontent with our lives, with what's transpiring in our country, in the world, I hope that you will take to heart the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and realize that the goal is for us all to be brothers and sisters, for us all to be able to join hands, because only then can each person truly be free. I thank you for joining me at this special edition of the Way to Wow shows. I thank you for your viewership throughout the years. And I thank you most deeply if you will commit to do your best to live your life according to the principles of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to strive as well as you can to make each and every man and woman your brother and sister, to hold out your hand to them in peace and love. I thank you so much for joining me today. And I remind you, Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage at all times, my friends.